Welcome to the Holiness Today podcast. On this episode, I have a conversation with Ryan Giffin, archivist for the Church of the Nazarene. In this conversation, Dr. Giffin shares what an archivist does, what the Church of the Nazarene has in the caves, and how he is working to preserve our history. Dr. Giffin is a minister, musician, scholar, and more recently, an archivist and historian. He has never met a stranger and is happy to resource you or your local church on all things Nazarene history. Well, I'm here with the Nazarene archivist, Ryan Giffin. Pleasure to be with him. He's a regular contributor in the Holiness Today magazine. He's instrumental in us getting our archives episodes up for the podcast, but it's good to have him here. And Ryan, just to get us started, I'm going to give you a big question. What is an archivist?
That is a great question. At a really basic level, Nate, an archivist is a records management person. So many organizations, including, of course, religious organizations, have an archivist. There's not a lot of denominations that have a full-time archivist these days, but some still do. The Church of the Nazarene has had one since 1979. But archivists specialize in managing, organizing, collecting, disseminating large amounts of material that speak to the institutional memory of the organization. These records assist in making decisions, in providing some context for how the organization got to where it's at today. So the Church of the Nazarene saw fit very early on to collect historical records. There was a manual statement. If I'm getting too far ahead here, cut me off, Nate, but there was a manual statement that went in 1932 that was a mandate for what the Nazarene Archives essentially is today. So the mandate went to the General Secretary at that time to collect and disseminate information related to the rise and the development of the denomination. So it's been in for almost 100 years, but not a full-time sort of active archives repository here until the late 70s. All through that time leading up to it, the denomination was collecting information and logging it, but eventually we saw that the great need to have a full-time staff to manage the growth of the repository. So that's what archivists do. We're part historians, but not every archivist is a subject matter expert. Many of them are, but many of them are not. They just specialize in how to manage and sort of control all this data that speak to the memory of the institution. So most people in my role have specialization in information management. They go like kind of a library sort of route. That's not always the case. My predecessor did not, I did not, but many of them do. So we're really dealing with just large amounts of information that, especially with the Church of the Nazarene, after 100 years, we're collecting quite a bit of info, various offices, and we're a global organization too. So we just have a whole lot of information to collect to steward the Nazarene story. So that's the big picture of what we're trying to do.
And before this, you were a pastor. You have a PhD in biblical literature, if I remember correctly. So you're a bit of a Renaissance man. How did you find yourself into the archives role? How did God kind of pull you into that role? Had you always had a heart for that deep down somewhere?
It's deep down somewhere. Let me just tell you my story here, Nate. So I had a call to ministry at a pretty young age, responded to that when I was in middle school, actually, and then went to college at Mid-America Nazarene University in Olathe, Kansas, USA, and earned a Christian education degree there and joined the staff at Mid-America shortly after that as a resident director. And through that time went to seminary at Nazarene Theological Seminary in the Kansas City area. And from there stepped into a youth ministry position in Mason, Michigan, which was terrific, and had a heart for student ministry, college ministry, young adult ministry, youth ministry in those earlier years. And then just felt a really strong call to do doctoral work in biblical studies, was just drawn to the scriptures and thought that I would, I thought I would end up teaching, but in some ways I'm kind of thankful that that didn't end up being the route I took. I've done some adjunct teaching. I'll probably do that again, but went to Asbury Theological Seminary in Wilmore, Kentucky for my doctoral work, studied with some really fantastic scholars there. And at the same time, as I was earning my degree, I was pastoring a small church just north of Lexington, Kentucky, in the great community of Paris, Kentucky, which was fantastic, great people there. And did that for 4.5 years until I received a call to return home to the Kansas City district. I grew up in North Topeka, so I'm kind of from around here, and got the opportunity to come back this way to pastor the good people of Village Community Church of the Nazarene. If you're familiar with the Kansas City area, it's on the Kansas side and near the Legends Shopping Center and the Kansas Motor Speedway. Really kind of fun part of Kansas
Yeah, it
City.
is developing
And
too.
yeah, yeah. So I was just really excited to do that. So I did that for 6.5 years. And during that time, about 6 years in, or about 5 years in, I got the call to this current role. I, so Nazarene history had always been kind of a side interest for me. I'd taken some classes through my educational journey in this. My emphasis was in biblical studies, but I just always kind of was drawn to the history of my own movement and the tradition in which I was ordained. So I'd done a lot of reading. I published an article in this area. I've published a few more since then. And so it wasn't a complete sort of out of nowhere. It was kind of a nice fit, but the role here at the archives was not something that I really had on my radar. My predecessor, Dr. Ingersoll, had announced his retirement, and that was in 2021. And so the position came open, and it just, through a interesting series of events that I could go into the weeds with, but I don't think I need to. I just ended up in this role. It's been terrific. And now it's 3 years in. I hope that I can do this for the rest of my working life if the church will have me. If I do a good enough job with it. My predecessor was in the role for 36.5 years, gave his life and is still contributing to the archives, and did a tremendous job. And it's advantageous for the organization to have longevity in these kinds of positions. So I hope I can stay and continue to do that. And the longer I do this, the better I will get at it, and hopefully be able to serve the church well in this role. So yeah, that's kind of how I got here. I didn't come with on like a straight line,
Right.
but really just strong interest in history and writing and research, and obviously strong interest in the church and the church's story as well.
Well, Stan is kind of an archives unto himself. I asked him a question one time, and it was a good answer. I was hoping for a 5 minute answer, and it was about an hour later that
Yeah,
I but it was
right.
all good. It was all good context. No slight to
Yeah,
Stan. So,
yeah,
so I, who are some of the notables? I mean, you could probably just, shoot them off the top of your head, but if you could do another PhD, I know that's a big thing, but if you could do a PhD on Nazarene history, what intellectual area would you choose to kind of
yeah.
dig into? There's probably too many, but name a few.
It's amazing, Nate, how, if I think that probably most listeners to this podcast will they'll have some experience with Nazarene history. They'll know some of the basics of the story, maybe, but it's amazing how much is there,
Yeah.
in 116 years since the unifying assembly at Pilot Point in 1908. In the scope of history is not very long, but in that time we have some rich stories that really could be unpacked and mined for some aspiring doctoral students who would do that. Every once in a while, I get a bug to go back to school, and if I could and do that, I don't know if I will, but if I do, I think Trevecca's story is really interesting. There's been some good writing on Trevecca's story, but how they came into the movement was pretty fascinating. Their founding figure, J.O. McClurkin, he started the Pentecostal mission, which became Trevecca College, which essentially became Trevecca College. They planted Trevecca. They were Nashville based, um, and he was a real charismatic kind of revivalist figure. Loved the Lord, but really had a passion for this kind of interdenominational, non-denominational holiness movement at a time when the Church of the Nazarene was very young. This is just a few years after Pilot Point, but he's still kind of doing his own thing over in Nashville, but had some interest in joining the Church of the Nazarene. And so we actually held our next assembly after Pilot Point in Nashville with kind of the idea that maybe we could woo them into joining us, or also on the same side, I think they were interested in checking us out too. So they ended up coming into the movement after McClurkin died. Shortly afterwards, Trevecca and the Pentecostal mission had kind of had some financial issues, and they were just thinking more and more about the health of their organization and organizing with a broader stream. And so they ended up coming into our movement, and we're better for it. It's hard to imagine the Church of the Nazarene without Trevecca, especially in the USA, Canada. So I think just the story of how they came in and McClurkin's sort of dynamic, charismatic personality, and I think there's a lot there that could still be unpacked, and I would have fun with that. I also think there's some work to do with the music of the church, with hymnody and the history of our hymnals and how those came together, and Halder Lillinus, and music has been so instrumental in our movement, to use a pun. It's been just significant. Like it's a part of the fabric of who we are as Nazarenes. We're a singing people. And so hymns, hymnals, songs have had such a spiritually formative impact on our people that I think there's some good research that could be had there that would really just continue to develop that or measure that impact and unpack it and sort of show how that has progressed over our 116 years of history. So those are things I think it'd be fun to dig into.
Plug to Holiness Today magazine, obviously, shameless plug, but you just wrote in your most recent article on the prayer section in the Sing to the Lord hymnal. So we'll plug that in the show notes so people can read that, but kind of a deep dive into that a little bit, but the Sing to the Lord hymnal.
Yeah, that's great. I think people our age and older know about the hymnal, right?
Yeah.
But there's a lot of folks that don't.
Right.
And so, man, there have been 4 denominationally authorized hymnals in our history. Sing to the Lord was the last one, and that was 1993. I think so. It's been 30 years since we've had a hymnal. And it's okay, times change, and the church is trying to steward its moment in history right now, missionally, and a hymnal doesn't always fit into that. But for some congregations, we still use the hymnal, and it has just a really strong emotional tie for a lot of people. That's what they grew up on. They have fond memories of singing these songs in church, and those were deeply impactful spiritual moments for them. So I just think to honor that would be a lot of fun to dig into.
We'll be right back with the rest of this episode. But did you know you can receive credit for listening to Holiness Today podcast? Holiness Today podcast episodes qualify for lifelong learning with the Church of the Nazarene. To register for lifelong learning, simply go to learning.nazarene.org. The Lifelong Learning Registry provides Nazarene ministers the opportunity to record and report their efforts to develop and maintain a pattern of lifelong learning to enhance the ministry to which God has called them. Every Nazarene minister is encouraged to engage in a variety of lifelong learning activities. The code for Holiness Today podcast is 64627 and will also be listed in the show notes. This code can be utilized for this episode and any previous episode you wish to listen to. Thank you for being a listener and sharing in the ministry of the Church of the Nazarene. Now back to the rest of your episode. what items does the archives host? I mean, give us just a little picture of
Oh,
obviously
yeah.
letters, but I mean, it really has a lot of stuff
Yeah.
down there. But
There's a lot of stuff.
what
So
does the inventory consist of?
we have over 5,000 cubic feet of material stored in it's essentially an offsite facility. It's about a mile west of the Global Ministry Center here. We affectionately refer to it as the cave because it's literally an underground industrial cave. The Church of the Nazarene is one of several organizations in the Kansas City metro area that have space down there. Some of the space that we have is devoted simply to storage for the Global Ministry Center offices, but there's a significant portion of that space that is where our archival holdings are housed. So the real work of our repository is down there. And in the cave is material that predates the Church of the Nazarene itself from the very earliest days of like the proto Nazarenes, the early movement up until like 2 weeks ago, right? So there's just a ton of material. It's correspondence. It is sermons. It's tons and tons of photographs, district newsletters, church newsletters, college and university holdings, yearbooks. We do have some artifacts. We don't have a ton of artifacts, and archival repositories don't specialize in artifacts. That's the domain of museums, and we are grateful for our brothers and sisters who work in museum studies because they can handle those artifacts. But we do have some. We have some pulpits, some old furniture from some historic buildings, like the Glory Barn out in Los
Hmm.
Angeles that Phineas Brizzy planted. Those the first the first like semi-permanent structure of Los Angeles First Church, which was the first local congregation with Church of the Nazarene in its name. So it's things like that. And it's, the correspondence, it's from general superintendents, from college professors, from significant theologians, from local church district superintendent, the kind of local ministry leaders. We have material from children's ministries, caravan materials, youth ministries, NYI, Bible quizzing. Like, I mean, if you think of anything that's Nazarene, I was just thinking, especially like lifelong Nazarenes looking back on their Nazarene
Right.
journey, anything that was part of their life in Nazarenedom, we have something on. And so, again, we're trying to steward the Nazarene story. So the day is going to come when all of us will not be here and
Hmm.
these materials will live on. So I think of the song, older song now, may all who come behind us find us faithful. I
Oh
think
yeah.
these
Steve Green,
materials kind of,
right? Is that Steve
yeah,
Green?
Steve Green, classic, And some
Yeah.
of us grew up in Nazarene churches where
Yeah.
that song was sung as a special number in song, right?
Yeah, I remember that.
But the lyric has aged really well.
Yeah.
And I think about that song, and as I do my work here, and we're archiving this material and storing it. For some folks, it may look like it's just sitting there, but it's not.
Right.
It's going to be the thing that tells the story for generations to come. So, yeah, a lot of material down there, fun to go through.
So in your opinion, it's probably hard to pick a single item, but what do you think is the most valuable or interesting item
Yeah.
that you
So
have down the cave?
Oh, well, we have Phineas Brizzy's ordination certificates. Those are, I don't know how valuable they are, but they're pretty precious to us.
Yeah.
Those are from his Methodist days, 1860s. I mean, they're some of the oldest items we have too. So he was ordained as a deacon and then ordained just a few years later as an elder in the Methodist Episcopal Church, and we have both of those certificates preserved down there in the cave. And he never received a Nazarene credential, which was interesting. The Church of the Nazarene just affirmed his Methodist ordination, and that was enough. That was enough to affirm him as a minister of the gospel. So he doesn't have a Nazarene parchment, but he has Methodist Episcopal Church parchments that we're fortunate to have. So we have chairs from the Glory Barn. And so the Church of the Nazarene was planted in a storefront out in Los Angeles. So there were other churches that were older than that came into the movement in 1908, but Brzez's church that he sort of co-planted out there in 1895 was essentially in a lodge hall. It's a storefront. It's actually the wrong term. It's an old lodge hall. It's called Redmond's Hall, and they were there for just a few years until they moved into another hall down the street, and then moved into their first structure, which was the Glory Barn. And for the early Nazarenes, this was like kind of like Mecca. I mean, it was like a really special place where the earliest Nazarenes had super fond memories of the glory of God falling in services, and Dr. Brzee preaching. And so it was a special place, but it literally, the structure was literally a barn. It was a four-sided, big, not insulated barn, which, you can get away with that in Southern California, right? It's awesome weather. You can do that, but couldn't do that here in Kansas City. But Brzee could pull it off in California. And they were in that facility for 6 years until they built a brick and mortar building that was probably safer and couldn't catch fire and things like that. So we have chairs from the Glory Barn. They moved out of the Glory Barn in 1903. We have chairs from that building. We actually have an old picture of Brzee on the platform in the Glory Barn. And there's chairs in the picture, like he's in the sanctuary. And we have 4 physical chairs in the collection. 2 of them are on display here in the Global Ministry Center. But it's remarkable that we have those chairs. It's just amazing. Like there's a few more I could mention. We have the minutes of like the meeting minutes of the organizational meetings of the merging groups. So the Church of the Nazarene out west was just one of 3 or 4 major merging groups. There's 3 major merging groups, and then the Trevecca crew kind of made 4, and the Pentecostal Church of Scotland was another group that came on just shortly after Pilot Point. But these 3 major merging groups on the East Coast, the American East Coast, the American West Coast, and the American South, we have their meeting minutes from like their pre-early Nazarene days when they're trying to decide, do we merge with the Nazarenes? How are we going to get together? Are we going to do this? Are we going to have General Assembly down at Pilot Point? Who's going to go? Who are going to be the delegates? All this stuff.
That's really cool.
Is like, it's like happening in real time for them. And we still have these things. So for scholars who work in this area, like my predecessor, Dr. Ingersoll, who's very much a subject matter expert, has a PhD in this stuff and wrote his dissertation in this area. Our resources at Nazarene Archives are like a playground. It is a treasure trove of stuff. Yeah. So we get researchers from all over that want to check out our material and use it in their publications because it's excellent material. So,
and the altar that is transported to every General Assembly, is it that every general prays on that altar? The new general?
Yeah.
So what is the story of the altar? I was going to guess what church it was from, but I don't trust my ability on that one.
Right. So the altar is from Manny, Louisiana, USA.
I would not have gotten that.
Yeah. It was the altar that General Superintendent R.T. Williams, he was the 7th General Superintendent. He was saved and sanctified at this altar in Manny, Louisiana as a teenager. And so he was kind of a force of nature as a general superintendent, great communicator, great preacher, great leader, really respected. And he came out of that early movement in the South. He was a Southerner and one of our most significant general superintendents that no one knows anything about. But R.T. Williams, he was saved and sanctified at this altar, and someone had found this altar and asked if the Church of the Nazarene was interested in having it, and of course we were. And so since the 1940s, I believe, every general superintendent that has been elected by the General Assembly has been commissioned in prayer at this altar. So it's traveled since the 1940s to every General Assembly. And it, like, I think, I think the altar itself was found like in a shed and was not in good
Wow.
condition, and they had to
Yeah.
repair it. And there's a whole story on it in the district journal or the General Assembly journal. But that's the significance of it. So it's in pretty good shape for how old it is.
Right.
And yeah, I was told, I think I was told on day one in this role that, Ryan, your job is to get that altar to the General Assembly and to get it home safely. So,
And make sure it
so
doesn't
no
break.
pressure, right? Yeah.
Right.
So we
Yeah.
did that, just bubble wrap and tape for days, and got it there and got it back. And the guys who loaded it on the truck were careful with it. So yeah, but
That's funny.
there's things like that that are pretty special that, we want to, if for anyone listening, if you ever come to the Global Ministry Center and take a tour, you can see all this great stuff. And there's a nice display with the altar is out on display, so you can read up on that, and be glad to show you around and talk about some of these things.
So tell us about the work of acquiring items. You just, well, not just, you've been back and forth to
Yeah,
Boston helping ENC, but
yeah,
tell us about sometimes the heavy lifting of it, but also just, if people are listening and they have Nazarene history sitting in their
yeah, yeah.
basement that they'd like to give, tell us a
Sure,
bit
right.
about that a little bit. How does that work?
Yeah, yeah. We get all of our best stuff just from people reaching out to us. Sometimes we initiate, like if we know somebody has something, and then we'll call them. Yeah, there are several like retired Nazarene general superintendents and district superintendents who live in this area. So I will sometimes make house calls and just say, hey, what do you got? But yeah, if someone wants to donate to us, they just need to reach out to Nazarene Archives. And so that's a Google search. Just search Nazarene Archives. Our webpage will come up. Um, you can also, I mean, and on that is all of our contact information. So if you want to get a hold of us by email, it's archives@nazarene.org. That's the best way to get a hold of us. And just tell us, if you've got something to donate, you're interested in donating it. We may take it, we may not. If we can't, we'll try to tell you where you could send it and find it a good home. We can't take everything. There's a lot that we already have for one, but also we do have some focus to what we take too. So we're trying to emphasize uh, things like the early movement and some of our distinctives like women in ministry and our international presence. So we don't just take anything and everything. We are trying to kind of be a little bit more picky and choosy. But if you're just trying to find a home for some of your Nazarene stuff and you want to check in with us, we'd sure be happy for you to do that. So that's really how you do it. It sounds really simple, but that's it. You just contact us, let us know. Don't be afraid to contact us. I mean, if you're like, should I call them? Just call us and we'll be happy to talk through what you have. But after that initial contact, then we'll find a way to assess what you have. If we are interested in receiving it, there's some paperwork that both sides will fill out just to make sure that that all of that is transferred in a proper way. Sometimes the material is shipped. Sometimes people drop it off to us. There's always a paper trail. So yeah, it's not a hard process. It's actually really easy. Contact us, tell us what you have, ask us if we're interested in it. We'll tell you if we are, and we'll go from there.
Give us a little bit of a synopsis of your work with ENC recently, because I
Sure.
saw what
Yeah.
we received, but tell us
Yeah.
what you had to do
Yeah. Yeah.
in that
Yeah.
process.
So most of the listeners here will know that Eastern Nazarene College, 124-year-old higher education institution here in the United States, located in Quincy, Massachusetts, the Boston, Massachusetts area, announced their closing this last summer, which is really sad. It's a hard thing, right? I mean, it's for folks who have deep ties to ENC alums and graduates and employees. it's a hard deal. In the midst of that, one of the things that the college had to decide was what to do with their archival materials, which, yeah, again, it's a 124-year-old institution, right? So there's a lot of history there, a lot of rich history. Books have been written about Eastern Nazarene College, and those books depended on the resources of their archives for their history, for the books that were written. So Eastern Nazarene College was started as the Pentecostal Collegiate Institute in 1900. They ended up moving out to Quincy shortly thereafter, but over that time, they have done such a great job of documenting their own history that it would have been devastating to see all of that go to Goodwill or
Yeah.
wherever they would
Right.
send that, right? So we had the conversation with them pretty early on about accessioning. That's the formal name for receiving their archival material. We had space for it. We knew it was a rich collection. We didn't want to come in and say, "Hey, we're taking your stuff." We wanted to honor whatever they wanted to do with
Right.
it, but we wanted to make ourselves available as an option for them. And it felt right. It felt right for their material to come here, for us and for them. And so through a lot of conversation with their archive staff, their library staff, their president's cabinet, their president, we ended up receiving that material. It's a fair bit of material. It's currently sitting on 13 pallets right now, and it's just standard archival banker size boxes of files that, again, in some cases go back to the very early founding days of Eastern Nazarene College. So we received all that. It came on a truck. There's some folks at Eastern that were kind to deliver that out to us. Want to give a shout out to Jeremy Scott and Dennis Scott if they're listening. So grateful for you guys. They actually drove the 20 plus hour trip from Quincy here to Lenexa, Kansas, and dropped it off. And several of us from the GMC, including Nate Gilmore, helped unload it. And it was just, we knocked it out. It got done. And all of that material is going to be safe and is going to live on.
Yeah.
I mentioned earlier that it was sad, but it's also um, a kind of a relief for them. I sensed as I went up to Quincy and
Right.
chatted with them, and I just had this sense that they were really pleased that this was coming to a place where it would be cared for. So yeah, obviously it's really rich historical material, so it's a win for us too. It's a real win-win situation, I think, in the midst of a tough deal. So yeah, it was something like that is like a no-brainer. We're going to receive that material.
Right.
There's some judgment calls that have to be made with some of the requests that we get, but that was not one. It was like, yes, we'll take this and we'll care for it. We'll be honored to take it. And so we have a lot to work through still with that. It's every day there's something that comes up, and we're praying for our friends at ENC who are trying to work through all these issues. And if I can give some more shout outs just really quick, I want to say
Yeah,
hi
absolutely.
to Amy Wong and Aaron McCoy and Susan Watkins and Sharon Bull and a lot of other folks that it gets dangerous to start naming names, but those folks have done above and beyond the Call of Duty kinds of work there at ENC to make sure not just that we get their material, but uh, everything else that they're sorting through right now. So yeah, that's one aspect of our work that is really significant, that we're trying to honor the institutional memory of a legacy institution, like a really significant place in Nazarene history. And hopefully we're doing that well, and hopefully we're doing that in a way that honors them and that they feel really good about.
Something you mentioned earlier was international history or working on,
Yeah,
receiving that.
yeah.
What does that look like? I mean, I guess I'm just going to ask a layman's question.
Yeah.
I've been down and saw some of the archive or the materials down in Pilar, but across the Nazarene globe,
Yeah,
uh, what does that look like? I mean, are there historical uh, artifacts that
yeah.
Archives is working on getting from other regions in
Uh,
Africa and whatnot?
yeah,
Or
not
what's a
really.
picture of that?
Yeah, so yeah, I'll just tell you that yeah, the Church of the Nazarene has had a strong global missions presence and emphasis since before the Church of the Nazarene was founded. So the early merging groups that merged at Pilot Point, they all had mission stations international. They all had places around the world that they were sending missionaries and investing in. So it's been in our DNA since before we were a thing. So for the Nazarene listeners who wonder, like every time they go to district assembly, why are they always talking about missions? It's just who we've always been. We've always been a global mission uh, organization. For us at the archives, we want to be really conscious of that. It's a part of our story, it's a part of our denominational story. There's also a sense in which we want to trust the local regions to care for their material too. So for us, we are really happy to receive just about anything that our non-USA Canada region brothers and sisters would want to send to us, but we're less inclined to reach out to them
Hmm.
unless there's something we know that they have that we can help them with. We're less inclined to reach out to them because we want them to keep it there on site if they can. So we get quite a bit of material from missionaries who've served in every every region of the church that will oftentimes when they retire reach out to us and say, hey, we've got some material that we think you might be interested in, and almost always we are. So that's a lot of the way that we've documented our our globalization up to this point. We do get district journals from non-USA Canada districts, which is really helpful. So shout out to all you district superintendents and district secretaries from outside of the USA Canada who are sending those to us. But we would typically only get those if they are sent to us. So we don't get a lot of artifacts, Nate, and we're not seeking those out. We don't get a lot of artifacts from here either. And again, we don't necessarily specialize in those too, but things like district journals, any
Hmm.
sort of big events that happen overseas, like Nazarene youth conferences and like NYI events, third wave kinds of things. Those when those happen outside of the USA, Canada, and we can receive materials that are connected to that, that helps us to show future generations that hey, this wasn't just a USA centric operation. That we really were a global movement and always have been.
You've also done a fair bit of work with Pilot Point recently. You've been down there a couple times, but for our Nazarene
Yeah,
listeners, tell us about Nazarene historical sites. If you've got people
yeah,
listening from USA, Canada, what are some areas
yeah,
that other than Pilot Point would be interesting,
yeah,
notable areas to check out?
yeah, yeah. So let me just say something about Pilot Point real quick,
Yeah,
and then
absolutely.
so Pilot Point, Texas, was the home of the Second General Assembly, and Pilot Point, if you're familiar with USA geography, it is just over the Oklahoma border in North Texas. It's a small town, 4 or 5 thousand people, but it's like 30, 45 minutes north of the Dallas Metroplex. So there's a lot of people down there in Texas, and we met down there for our second General Assembly in Pilot Point in 1908, and that was our unifying assembly. And so since 1923, we've pointed to that moment in 1908 for our founding, our official founding. There's plenty of stuff happening before that, but we saw that moment as so significant when the East Coast branch, the West Coast branch, and the Southern branch of the United States holiness movements merged to form the denomination that we know today. That was so all of the literature that we have on that moment in 1908 is like watershed kind of kind of moment in our story. So
Right.
we have a church still down there in Pilot Point. Grace Point Church of the Nazarene is right on the grounds there where everything went down in 1908. And Pastor Dwayne Edwards is doing a terrific job down there. He's been there for almost 9 years. The church is thriving. It's doing really well. They need a new building because they're outgrowing the little one that they have. But Dwayne's doing good work. The denomination still owns part of the property there, and the local church there owns most of it, but there's some property that we care for. So I make a little voyage down there every October around October 13th, which is the date when the union took place in 1908. I journey down there and just check in on the property, say hi to Dwayne, encourage him. He encourages me, and just try to stay connected to what's happening there. We do have monuments down there, like a physical monument that commemorates what happened there. So that site will always be significant historically for our movement because of that, because that's just where our founding assembly was. But there are other places too that we could discuss. Just this last General Assembly in 2023, the General Assembly approved 5 sites as historic sites and landmarks for the denomination. And there's a process for that. It's actually, there's a piece in the manual about how to do that. And we can help folks walk through that if they have a site that they think would be worthy of that. But yeah, this summer I was up at Indian Lake Nazarene Camp in Vicksburg, Michigan.
Is that one of the historical sites?
It's not one of the historical sites.
Okay.
Yeah. So it should be. Brad Durness, if you're listening, let's get Indian Lake on the register, because that's another kind of slam dunk, I think. JB Chapman had a cottage up there. Bud Robinson had a cottage up there. Like significant folks in Nazarene history spent some time on that campground. And so no, that wasn't one of the sites. There's Cambridge Church of the Nazarene in Cambridge, Massachusetts.
Okay.
Just celebrated their 125th anniversary. They still meet in their original building.
Wow.
It is unbelievable. So that was a slam dunk. That was approved this last General Assembly. There's a little chapel in Cabo Verde, Africa. Brava is where in Cabo Verde where this is located, but it's the chapel of it's named after Jose Diaz, and it's been there for over 100 years. Jose Diaz was the first Nazarene missionary out there, sent by the East Coast branch before the Church of the Nazarene was established in Pilot Point. He was from Brava, had immigrated to the United States of America, and then felt a call to go back home and be a missionary there to his homeland. And so he goes and almost single-handedly builds this chapel in the early 1900s. that the physical structure is still there. Yeah, but the church has built a new building since then. They needed to, but this little chapel is still there. And so that the chapel and the new church, that newer church, that was approved this last summer. Primera Iglesia Mexicana de Nazareno in Los Angeles, California. This is the first Hispanic Church of the Nazarene in the USA. So it was started by May McReynolds, who was commissioned directly by Brazee himself to do this work. So that was significant. It was recognized as a Hispanic church in 1906. Again, that's 2 years before Pilot Point. So it's interesting. The Nazarene Bible Institute in Coban, Guatemala, has been around since 1921. That was approved this last General Assembly. Fitkins Memorial Church of the Nazarene in Meridian, Mississippi, was pastored by Charles Johnson for over 50 years. He was a significant figure in the American Civil Rights Movement, and that church was approved this last summer. And the Cambridge Church, as I mentioned earlier. So those are historic. There's a distinction that we make in the manual between a historic site and a historic landmark. So the landmarks have denominational significance. They're significant for the whole church, but there's also a mechanism for establishing a historic site, which might be significant for a region or
Hmm.
for a district. So if you're listening to this and you think, we have a campground or we have a historic church on our district, I'm not sure we're impacting the whole world, but it's really significant locally for our district. We can help with that process too. And we love to help with that process. There's quite a few places in our movement that aren't on this register that probably should be. So, like Indian Lake is one that just immediately comes to mind. That place has been significant for the movement, but especially in Michigan, that's that's one that we could easily add to this, I think. And so, yeah, reach out to our office and let us know, district superintendents, district secretaries, if we can help with that process. We'd sure love to do that.
And some of the work that you do is helping celebrate a church's memorial as well. So
Yeah,
you'll get emails about that.
yeah, it's a we.
This plug might give you more
It
work,
might, yeah.
if
Well,
people are isn't. But tell us about that a little
yeah.
bit.
Sometimes we can help, sometimes we can't. It's a call we get every week from a church that is turning 100 years old, or 50 years old, or a district that's that old, and they're celebrating their centennial. They should. It's a huge thing any for any organization to be around for 100 years is a landmark kind of thing. So uh, we will get inquiries from these places about any sort of information that we have on their church or their district. Sometimes we have good information, sometimes we don't. And I'll say this, Nate, that the info that we have on local churches is largely due to the local church sending us their info over the years. So if a church is celebrating their 75th anniversary and they create a 75th anniversary booklet, video, or anything they do that they create to commemorate this, if they will send that to the archives, that would be great. We'd love to receive that. They can mail it to us. They can reach out to our office. We'll tell them how to send that to us. And then we can add that to our repository and preserve it. And then when the 100-year anniversary comes around, we have some material that we can share. So that churches have been good to do that over the years, but we'd sure love to have more local history. So yeah, that's a thing that we assist with. Often it's pointing the local church in the right direction. So sometimes we can resource, but sometimes we can say, who there locally could you talk to? Who's the matriarch? Who's the patriarch? What records do you have? We can help interpret some of those records. And we do have all of the district journals ever published, I believe. So in those district journals is good information about the foundings of churches. So every district superintendent's report is published in those journals. So if your church was if your church was planted in 1943, we could look at the 1943 district assembly journal, look at the district superintendent's report, and there's a good chance that the district superintendent said something about this new church that was being planted in 1943. So that would give some information. Those reports also often contain info about new buildings that churches built. So we can kind of sleuth out some historical information if folks reach out to us. Sometimes it's limited and we just do the best we can, but we're sure happy to help in those situations where we can.
You mentioned Indian Lake, but you also plugging you as someone that can travel and give the origin story of the Church of the Nazarene, but you also provided that at Indian Lake this last summer,
Yeah,
July, I believe
yeah.
is the date. But I tried to record that at General Assembly and failed, so we still need to get that for the podcast. But you kind of have a good origin story that you're happy to kind of share with other districts as well for the Church of the Nazarene, if I'm
Yeah,
understanding that correctly.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. The district superintendents of the USA Canada region have been kind to reach out to me. I was super privileged to speak to them as a group, and so I shared some things with them. And then since then, have had some follow-up invitations to speak specifically to pastors and district assemblies. just about the origin of the Church of the Nazarene and kind of refreshing our memory for the sake of our mission. Where have we been? What was important to our founders? What did they emphasize? And we can kind of speculate a little bit about what they might say to us today. What advice would they have for us? What encouragement would they have for us? What critique would they have for us? So, yeah, it's been fun. It's been fun to travel and to meet people and to share that story. And I sometimes I'll think, I'm the only history nerd around here, right? I'm the only one who cares about this stuff. But then I go to Michigan or to Colorado or to Texas and I share this story, and I'm amazed how many folks really resonate and appreciate hearing their own story, because it really is our story, right? I mean, it's for especially for the crowd at District Assembly, most of those good folks have been Nazarenes for their whole life, and they grew up singing from the hymnal and it's have really deep ties to our movement. So to hear where we came from, why we got started, why God appeared to have raised us up, it is inspiring. So happy to do more of that. I have a Zoom meeting with a group of district pastors here in December, so we can connect that way too. So yeah, it's been fun to do that. It's been fun to share the story.
So all district superintendents listening, Ryan will come and give you a lecture on the origin of our church. So yeah, it's good though. I'm so mad at myself for I plugged in to record Ryan at General Assembly, and halfway through the recording, I ran out of batteries. So
Hey,
that's why you don't send me to do techie stuff.
you got a few things
Make sure
going.
you got batteries.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Well, Ryan, I'll be upset if I don't do this. I have to ask fun questions
Yes,
occasionally. So, I
please.
mean, this is all fun for me, but
Yeah, yeah.
you and I are nerds, so we enjoy this stuff. But
Right.
some thought-provoking questions for you here. If you could travel to any point in history, when would you travel to? I guess when and where, because you
Wow.
could pick the wrong location and not see
Wow.
anything. But
Wow. Does this have to be connected to Nazarene history, Nate? Does this?
it could be, but it could be, it could be biblical history. Sometimes when I ask this, I say not in the Bible because
Yes.
everyone feels that
Yeah.
they need to say, well, the resurrection or
Yeah.
Easter,
Yeah.
I mean,
Right. Right.
you know,
Right. Oh my
Christmas,
goodness.
first
Any
Christmas.
any point in history. Oh my goodness. Could I go see my own birth? That would-
Yeah, if you wanted to see
wow,
that.
that'd be amazing. So I'm like I'm in my DeLorean traveling through time.
Yeah, yeah. Back to the
I'll
Future
keep it
style.
close to the Nazarene story here. I just think it would be amazing to go to Redmond's Hall where Brzee and J.P. Whitney held their first service. This is October 6th of 1895. The Church of the Nazarene wasn't even called the Church of the Nazarene yet. It was a very much like today with church planting, at least here in the States, there's typically like a preview service or something like that. That's kind of what it was. It's like we're not organized. We're not, there's no hierarchy. We don't know who's in charge. We know Breeze's going to preach for us this morning, but that's about all we know. Just to see that and like be a fly on the wall to witness that would be a trip. And we do have some nice reports from that, some really precious historical reports from that, like the LA Times daily newspaper published a report the next day on that service. And I guess the house was packed and Brzee preached a great sermon. And so that's cool. But to be there to witness that would be that'd be hard to pass up if I can fire up the flex capacitor and go do that.
I love it. All right, another time travel based question, but I guess. But what character in the Bible do you identify with the most? Maybe your personal hero, or you see yourself in
uh,
when you're reading through it, and you're like, maybe there's a couple.
yeah, yeah. So for my PhD work, I focused on Paul, but I'm always drawn to the story of Joseph in the Old Testament. Um, just I don't know if I see myself in Joseph. I think I've had a really good life, and But I see Joseph's resilience and great faith in God in the midst of betrayal and um, uh, yeah, just he could have given up at like 20 different points, right? And so continuing to trust in the Lord, that the Lord had a plan for him, had a calling on his life, and had a vision for him, and the way that he held on to his faith to get through what he got through is, whenever I preach this story, I've preached a sermon series through Joseph a couple of times, and I'm always preaching to myself, right? I mean, this is the story of faith, to trust in God through the midst of it, whatever circumstance life throws at us, and life certainly threw some tough circumstances at him.
You didn't sing any Andrew Lloyd Webber through that sermon series, did you?
No, I don't think I did.
Break out the
I
Technicolor
should.
dream coat.
Maybe for the next one I will.
Yeah, no, our pastor preached through Joseph recently. My wife nudged me in church. She
Yeah,
goes, "I wonder if we're going to get some songs here
that
from the
would be
musical."
awesome. That would be sweet. That'd be great.
No, kidding. All right, what's the best advice you received starting out in either your academic or spiritual or pastoral journey
Yeah. I
or archives journey, if it's a
yes.
recent journey?
I It's really good advice that I received. It was for me to be authentically me. I think there's a temptation, we see, at least for me, I see these people that I respect and kind of want to to be like them, and to do the job the way they would do it, and to um, do everything the way they did. And the older I get, Nate, the more I realize that I've been wired in a really specific kind of way, and I have my own passions and my own skill set, my own giftings that are probably different than those who've come before me. Even in this role at the archives, my predecessor was extremely gifted, is extremely gifted, um, but in ways I'm realizing that are different than me. And so this role is going to look different with Ryan in it than it did with Stan in it. And I think maybe in my first year in this role, that was like, I don't know if it should look different than it does with Stan, but I've become more comfortable in my own skin as the time has gone on. And um, so that's been good advice for me, to just lean into
Yeah.
that, and to trust that God's gifted me in a certain way. And I think for our listeners, I hope they would do that too, right? Just trust the Lord's got you where he's got you for this season, and that is not by accident, and to bring what you bring to the table and know that it's going to be good.
So how do you recharge your batteries? What hobby or what do you do in your free time to recharge
Yeah.
yourself?
Yeah. Uh, I like to eat good food, Nate.
My next question was gonna be on food, so this is a perfect segue.
Oh man, rest is so important. Um, I love a good coffee house. I love a good book. I try to um I try to do some reading outside of work areas, like I just will try to read a novel or something that I don't have to be responsible for, or report on or anything like
All right.
that.
Pure
So
pleasure.
that's life giving for me. Exercise is helpful. So that, and good sleep, like kind of the basic
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
That's how I recharge. Yeah.
So what's your
Yeah.
favorite meal then? Or what's a meal you've had
Uh,
recently you thought, man, I need to do that again? Restaurant,
so
maybe something you made.
the the Kansas City boy here is going to give a shout out to Smokehouse Barbecue. This is up north. If you come to Kansas City, this is right by the airport. So go see Smokehouse Barbecue and order the burnt ends and the mac and cheese. I just ate that a couple nights ago with some of our Nazarene librarians from our Nazarene institutions. We went out to Smokehouse for they were doing a conference up there. They invited me to come up and share with them a little bit, and then we all went to Smokehouse, and it was a good decision because I forgot how good it was.
Yeah.
So Kansas Cityans can be kind of snobbish about their barbecue. but I'm not. I am a respecter of pretty much all barbecues.
Yeah.
So
Smokehouse.
yeah,
I don't think I've
yeah.
had
Smokehouse is
Smokehouse.
the
I'm
most
trying to remember
recent. Yeah,
that.
Smokehouse. It's
Pretty good.
good. There's a lot of other great places around, but that hit the spot that night.
All right, staying on food, dessert.
Yeah,
Favorite dessert.
good old vanilla ice cream. Plain, boring. If I can just go to Dairy Queen and
Just
get
get
a
a vanilla.
small cup of vanilla ice cream,
Yeah.
I'm a happy guy.
So no toppings or anything on it, just
I don't even
vanilla.
need it. No, not that for that ice cream. I don't even need toppings. It's just it stands alone. But yeah, if there's any sort of chocolate sitting in front of me, I'll eat all the chocolate. So Kit Kat bars,
Yeah.
it's yeah, it's
Those are
any,
snacks
any
though. Those don't count as
yeah,
dessert,
those
right?
are kind of snackish. But yeah, dessert. Yeah, chocolate chip
Getting
cookies.
yeah.
Is that a snack or is that a
I
dessert? Because
don't
I'll eat
know,
both anytime. Is
I
that a
view too
meal or
many
is
desserts as snacks. It's a problem of mine.
that? Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
Ice
that's
cream,
funny.
ice cream is good. That works for me.
Okay,
Yep.
so what book would you recommend I was going to say nonfiction, but fiction, but non-related to, if you just want to give a book for someone to read to just for pleasure, enjoy it,
Yeah, yeah.
not related
Oh,
to an area of study.
uh, I go to C.S. Lewis's The Chronicles of Narnia.
Okay, yeah,
That's those never get old for
that's going to
me.
help. Yeah.
But yeah, I I think that's yeah, things along those lines are kind of fun for me. Those kind of fantasy fairy tale sorts of things.
Allows you to escape a little bit, so.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And there's always a moral, right? Too. It's good for the heart. It's good for moral formation, but yeah, it helps you get out of your own world and get some creativity and
Absolutely.
imagination.
Absolutely.
So yeah.
So if God came to you and said, Ryan, I want you to do something else, you pick it. What do you think God
Wow.
would call
Oh my goodness.
alternative vocation? Where do you see
Um,
yourself?
maybe a rock star.
He will equip you and enable you to do this. So
Yeah,
yeah, Rockstar, I
yeah,
like that. Yeah.
yeah, maybe so. I don't know. I feel like yeah, I'm kind of living the dream here,
Yeah.
Nate. So I don't know. I thought I wanted to teach, and I trained to be a professor, to be an academic. I still do academic work, but in archives it looks different. So I think I might do that. But I don't know. It's so my faculty friends, they know that it's a great life, but there's challenges in that role too. So I'd probably go that route, but I miss pastoring. If the right church called on the right bad day, might be tempted to do that. But yeah, that's a tough one for me, man.
Well, you do.
I don't.
You said Rockstar, but you do play guitar, so you are musically
I
talented. So
love
that's
music.
that's
I've
not out
led
of the realm.
worship.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not out of the realm. Yeah, I mean, I think I've always been drawn to music. So, in another life, I was a worship leader, and I kind of did that in my college days, and still do some of that. Sometimes I don't do a lot anymore, but it's always life giving when I get the opportunity to do that. So maybe I would try to do that if my voice could hold out, but we'll see.
So transitioning towards the future, we've just talked about a bunch of history, but in the Nazarene archives, there's a lot of correspondence, if I remember correctly. There's a lot of
Yeah,
letters, there's a lot of back and forth, but you
right.
and I are meeting on Zoom. We probably
Yeah.
already checked our email today. We probably already checked our text messages today, I would assume. I
Uh-huh.
mean, you and I were texting earlier, so I know that's true. What
Yes,
what does archiving look like in the future? Because
that's a great question, Nate.
emails, text
Yeah,
messages, these kind of conversations, what does
yeah.
that look like in the future?
It still remains to be seen, Nate. There's a lot of conversation in the Archives Guild about what we do with digital media and electronic communications, and the way that we document things in the future may look different. Right now, the jury is kind of still out, and we still, at least in our repository, and others do this too. We still actually print out what we can, like physically print a paper copy of of an important email that'll come across our desk, or that it seems daunting to try to save every piece of digital correspondence in this digital age that we live in. So
Hmm.
social media, text messaging, email, there's just it's impossible for a lot of folks to keep up with that, just just to keep up with it just in their life, right? So to try to document that and preserve it for the perpetuity of history, it I don't know, man. I'm not sure. My colleagues who have some deeper training in archives may have some insight here, but for me, I'm not sure what the solution is. Part of the dynamic that we deal with too, so it's the sheer volume of digital communications, but also uh, it's a technology issue too, because technology changes over time. So a question that many of us have is the technology today going to be transferable to the technology of tomorrow? Uh, I think we're getting closer and closer to having some firmer grips on that. But um, when the internet was on its rise, that was a big question. Like, are we going to be able to save this? Because half the battle in archives is preservation. Actually, that's maybe more than half the battle. So really, that's job one is preserving it. Job two is disseminating it, is getting it out to the public, but we can't disseminate what we can't preserve. So I don't know. Yeah, I think for the time being, we're just going to continue to print things out and save it the good old fashioned way, until there's some really crystal clear and uniform across the board kinds of technological mechanisms for saving digital communications. I think that's where we're going to stay for a while, but we'll see. We'll
Now,
see.
now
I
more
don't.
narrowly, what do you see the hope? What is your hope in the next 5 to 10 years for Nazarene archives? What are you looking forward to?
Yeah, I hope that we can disseminate our material more effectively. I think that we have a great opportunity with all this digital communication that is at our disposal now to do that in ways that we haven't been able to do in the past. So historically, we've been really good at collecting, accessioning, and preserving material. Again, we have over 5,000 cubic feet of material. So that's a testament to my predecessor for all the work that he did over his 36 and a half year career to gather and preserve this material. It's rich. It's a ton of really good historical treasure that we have. And now I think we're at a place where disseminating this material can be more of a priority for us. So just telling the Nazarene story through our collection to folks that would not be able to travel here to Kansas City to look at what we have, but we can present it to them through social media. We can scan things and send send things over to them in ways that we couldn't have done even 10 years ago. So that's my hope, that we'll just get better and better at that, that we'll be able to digitize more material and make this rich collection much more accessible than it has been. So I hope we can keep moving in that direction.
And for our listeners, how can they be supporting Nazarene archives? In what way could they be prayer? Obviously, how can they be
Yeah,
praying for you? But
yeah,
also, in what ways can our
yeah,
listeners be supporting our history?
yeah. That's a great question. Continue to reach out to us. There's a lot of folks all over the world that reach out to us. So um, think of us when you've got that material. Don't think that, man, should I reach out to them? Just reach out to us, and if we I joke, but I tell folks, we can throw it away just as easy as you can throw it away. So if you're just going to throw it away,
Might
call
as
us and
well.
let us
Yeah.
make that decision, right?
Yeah.
um yeah, that's a way to support us. Engage with us on social media. We have active social media pages on Facebook. We have a an X page, formerly known as Twitter. We're there. We'd love to do some more with social media, but when folks engage with our posts, we love that. And we have just an open door kind of policy through our digital communications. If you listener have recommendations for us, if there's some things that you'd like us to highlight, if you have questions for us, don't feel like you can't reach out to us. Please do. We're open to your suggestions. We're open to listener feedback, and we take that seriously. So that's a way you can support our mission, to help us to know what you want from us and how we can serve you.
Well, Ryan, this was an excellent time with you. I'm sure we could go all the way up to your next meeting, but I'll let you have some space between the next meeting. But this was a good time to spend with you, and we hope to have you back on.
Yeah. Thank you, Nate. Always a pleasure. Appreciate the work of Holiness Today and your team, and all that you've done to support Nazarene Archives too. You have increased our footprint significantly just through your work on the podcast and in print. So thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Holiness Today podcast. If you enjoyed this production and wish to hear more, visit holinesstoday.org/podcast or find us on Spotify, Apple, and Google Podcasts.